Hey, welcome back to Gronsky Books. I'm still in my old hometown of Osage, Iowa. This is my old high school, and I'm here to talk about 10 books that I reread recently from my high school days. After recently rereading these books, I thought it'd be fun to come back to my hometown where I grew up and give you a little tour and discuss the books with you at the same time. Now, I recently published a video about the books that I reread from middle school, and you can check that out here. In that video, I went to different locations all around the town, but this isn't a very big town, so I don't have a lot of locations. So in this video, I'm actually gonna take you down to the Harry Cook Nature Trail. It's a 2-mile trail that takes you from the edge of town down to the Cedar River. And for a lot of years, it was the place I would zen out. I would go camping down there, I would bring books, I would read down there, I'd ride my bike down there. So I wanna kind of revisit that spot in this video.
Join our hands together and we'll sing in quicksand. Run it out together till we misunderstand. Adopt a life of silence on a trim scrap of land, or reconsider living on the other hand.
Yeah, this is the big snake. Okay, yeah. All right, so I'm here at the Harry Cook Nature Trail, and I've got my note cards, and I'm about to start counting down the 10 rereads from high school, starting with The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. All right, so The Illustrated Man is a collection of 18 short stories by Ray Bradbury, all science fiction, of course. I only remembered 2 of them. I didn't remember their names, but one of them was called The Other Foot. That is a story about Mars being colonized by black people and being visited by a white man who needs to be rescued. The other story I remembered was really the framing device of the entire set, which is The Illustrated Man, about a man who has tattoos that come to life. And in this edition, the 2008 Harper Voyager edition that I read, it added another second short story also called The Illustrated Man, in which another man has tattoos that come to life, probably done by the same tattoo artist, I'm guessing, although that's never made explicitly clear. So the second story is about a carnival worker who's on the verge of getting fired. And in order to save his job, he decides to become an illustrated man. So he goes to a blind tattoo artist and gets tatted all up, right? While he's being tattooed, this old woman tells him that these tattoos will reveal the future. You know, I'm not sure he believes her, but when they do indeed tell his future, it doesn't exactly work out all that great for him in kind of that classic Ray Bradbury style. It's kind of brutal, kind of sensational, but it works on a lot of levels. It's a lot of fun. But while The Illustrated Man dips his toes in mysticism, most of these stories are science fiction in nature, pitting man against technology. Now, I would never call Ray Bradbury a Luddite by any stretch of the imagination, and I don't think these stories are exactly warnings, but I do think he has a bit of a prescient imagination, especially the story in which the children's nursery controlled by AI ends up destroying the parents. That story was pretty terrifying. I would say that Ray Bradbury is probably excited by technology as much or more than he was frightened by it. In much the same that most of us are excited by people more than we are afraid of them. I read Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 and 2010 back to back sometime around my junior year of high school after watching Stanley Kubrick's brilliant masterpiece, The Space Odyssey, right? And then from there, I went in and I watched who directed the Peter Hyams. I watched Peter Hyams' The Year We Made Contact, the sequel, right? And I experienced something of a tonal shock viewing the films back to back that I didn't experience reading Clarke's books back to back. The 2 films are totally different, even though they're based on the same author's work. Clarke's books just flowed very neatly one into the other. But that was back in high school. When I reread these books, I also decided to read the other 2 books in Clarke's Space Odyssey series, 2061 and 3001, and I had that same kind of tonal shock when I read Clarke's books. because those books, especially 3001, were so different from 2001 and 2010 that I kind of felt like I had this whiplash between the books. 3001 just completely abandons all the thematic messaging from 2001. So 2001 is a book in 3 parts, and I won't spoil those for you because I really believe that 2001 deserves to be read. It's one of the greatest sci-fi novels ever written and should be read by anyone who, 1, loves sci-fi, 2, didn't understand the end of Stanley Kubrick's movie, or 3, what happens when in our first encounter with an alien species we realize that they are indecipherable to our meatbag brains. All right, the next book is Trout Fishing in America by Richard Brautigan. Now, this novel was published in 1967. Now, this isn't really a novel about trout. It isn't even really a novel. So, Trout Fishing in America is only about 112 pages long. But I've read it just about every year since 1996. Now, I first read this novel when my buddy Clem found this beautiful book at a garage sale. He thought this cover was hilarious, and so he read it and then found the content to be even more hilarious. So I took it home and read it and reread it and eventually started to obsess over it. And since reading Trout Fishing in America, I've since read just about everything that Richard Brautigan has ever published. The man was a certifiable nutcase, but he was also one of the most fearlessly imaginative thinkers and one of the funniest wordsmiths to come out of the post-beat generation. In addition to his novels, he wrote several works of poetry, the value of which, I'd argue, is in their wordplay rather than in their form. So I learned how to mountain bike when I was in high school. And by mountain bike, I mean riding on trails like this. So I learned how to bike. This is called the Devil's Punch Bowl, and this has been added since I lived here. I don't know how dicey this gets, but I'm gonna have to remember this if I ever come back to this town. This will be kind of a cool thing to check out. All right, next book, J.D. Salinger's 9 Stories, his short story collection. And I'm gonna level with you. I read 9 Stories in high school shortly after reading Catcher in the Rye. And I loved Catcher in the Rye then, and I still do to this day. But I was not prepared for the shift in the style of prose that J.D. Salinger employs to express Holden Caulfield's first person thoughts versus the third person narratives throughout all of the 9 stories. These two styles bear no resemblance to one another, and I, for one, was not prepared for the old switcheroo. So I forced my way through the first 8 stories, not really understanding anything that I was reading at all. And then I got to the last story, Teddy, a story about a brilliant, clairvoyant child who has a tragic end. And I understood that one. I quite liked that story. And I poured all my pretensions into Teddy. How I'd read all my Salinger, and but all I'd ever be able to discuss was that one story out of the 9, because it's the only one I had any kind of grasp on. Now, since then, I've come to love all 9 stories the same way that I first loved Teddy. My favorite being the 6th story, For Esme with Love and Squalor. I mean, just try reading that story without bringing a lump to your throat. And now, I'm not a Salinger scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I have read all of his 4 major works several times. And I'm always taken in by his obsession with troubled genius. The troubled genius is an overplayed trope in literature today, to be sure, but J.D. Salinger is the preeminent modern writer who epitomizes the device. Here's another one of these trails. Oh boy, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but it is a hot and sticky summer. Okay, All right, so the next book on the list is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. When I first read this book, I thought it was the funniest book I'd ever read in my life. Obviously, I was in high school. I'd never been in the military. It is some military satire. It satirizes the bureaucracy in the government. But reading it now in 2023, after being a retired veteran of the Air Force, the satire is still on point, but the humor just didn't hit me like it did when I was a teenager. I guess clever humor isn't as funny to me now as it used to be. I guess I require more of my comedy than just being clever. I guess I like my comedy to mean something also. I don't know what that says about me. I'm kind of hard to please when it comes to comedy, I admit that. But Catch-22 wasn't a bad book. It was so episodic that it never really seemed to go anywhere, and I kept getting frustrated with it. And there was a lot I forgot about the book. For example, the all too casual use of some racial slurs. And I don't know what the point of throwing those in there was. Maybe some historical relevancy, I don't know. They weren't thrown in there to make any kind of moralizing points, that's for sure. And so similarly to my brief review of Tom Sawyer in my middle school book, the reason I had a hard time remembering what happened in Catch-22 is because it was so episodic. When all the events of the book are unrelated to each other or very loosely tied together, kind of daisy-chained but not dependent upon one another, intrinsically linked, becomes kind of a monotonous thing, like almost like you could just jump ahead 200 pages and not miss a thing. I don't mean to imply that nothing happens in Catch-22. Quite a lot happens, and if by happens I mean there's a lot of people having conversations, then yeah, a lot happens. There are a whole lot of characters in this book, and there's a good bit of characterization. Joseph Heller does a really good job going through the continuum of kind of zany characters that you meet in the military, and that work I appreciate. I probably won't return to this one ever again. It's not a terrible book, but I've read it twice now. I get it. We are now walking along the Cedar River. Spent a lot of hours playing around in these waters as a kid. Alrighty, the next book is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. Yet another book I have lost some esteem for over the years. So like a lot of young men, I read this book for the first time as a teenager, and I was really taken in by the gonzo style of literature. I mean, I appreciate what the book was at the time. You know, the arts world needed a book that didn't couch its underworld nature. And though, I mean, I know it's not the point, but yet again, there's not really much of a story to speak of. And that can be kind of hard for me sometimes to hang my hat on when all that's left is gonzo prose and wild antics and living to excess. I can hang my hat on a narrative that's lacking in plot if it's giving me something of substance, but I don't think mescaline-fueled road trips is fulfilling enough anymore. That's not to say it's all bad. I mean, this is a very quotable book. I like the cadence of events, even though the events kind of feel a little unmoored to the rest of the world. The cadence of the novel feels really fresh, and I think it gets emulated a lot in a lot of young writers' work. And there's a reason for that. It feels refreshing when you read it. It's fast-paced. You go through it very quickly, and there's an energy that is instilled in the reader when one reads it. And that's awesome. And I found a bench, so I'm gonna sit down for a minute. So I'm gonna read this to you. One of my notes here says that Thompson reserves the use of dialogue for the more shocking or funny aspects of his story. And then I've got a couple examples of dialogue here. As your attorney, I advise you to tell me where you put the goddamn mescaline. And I feel a powerful lust for red salmon. I don't know why I wrote those down. A powerful lust for red salmon. That does sound good, actually. I'm pretty hungry right now. But you know, you reserve the dialogue for lines like that instead of just like the banal exposition that a lot of dialogue is. Hey, Phil, what time is it? I don't know. Eric, I left my watch at home. Oh, that's too bad. I guess we'll have to go in the diner and ask them. Okay, let's do that then. That is literally the worst example. There's also a part in this book about Lucy, and if you've read the book, you'll probably know the part I'm talking about. It makes me really uncomfortable to read sections. Oh, hold on a second, there's someone running by. It makes me really uncomfortable to read sections of books that take away the agency of other characters, but who has rights to do what to the girl without the girl's consent. And like, ugh, it's gross. It's gross stuff. I mean, it was never okay, right? And it was meant to be shocking even at the time. But that kind of stuff, I mean, there's some stuff that I just think should be left out. Anyway, I'm glad I reread Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but it will almost certainly be the very last time. All right, so the next book we've got on the list is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. The dreaded Grapes of Wrath. How many of you read this book and just hated it in high school? So all I really remembered about The Grapes of Wrath was that there was an old jalopy driving out west in the dust and this general feeling of malaise over everything, and more dust, and some more dust. And so I reread it this year, and I discovered that all those things are abundant in this novel, in heaps. The dust, the jalopy, the out west, the malaise. It's all there. But it's so much more than that. I mean, I really wasn't prepared for how much I was going to like this book. And my reread now as an adult has the benefit of a lot of life experience. Oh, hold on. Look at this. Look at that gnarly tree. Look at all those butts. I forgot what they're called. My mom will remind me. Barrels. It's right on the tip of my tongue. So personal brushes with desperation, depression, and despair really helped me identify with all of the characters. And that's everyone from the wayward son fresh out of prison to the pastor who has kind of lost his faith and has resigned to take the world at face value. And all the way to the grandfather who dies from the shock of being uprooted from the only life he's ever known. I mean, no spoilers here, but the very, very end of the book was an act of such shocking desperation and so compassionate that I cannot believe I ever forgot it. Forgot there's a firing range up there. Anyway, I'm not likely to forget it this time. I was continuously struck by the resiliency of compassion and goodness and generosity growing out of the cracks of all the barren places in this world. That despite all of the oppression, characters were able to provide solace for one another. I'm also left uneasy, though, about the unresolved nature of the ambiguous ending. But I do have my suspicions about what probably happened, and that leaves me with kind of this well of sadness inside. It's kind of this beautiful sadness, but it's a well of sadness. And that's the most Steinbeck book that I ever read. So, like, what else do you expect from Steinbeck but finishing the book with a well of sadness inside you? A beautiful well of sadness, though. All right, so what you're looking at here is a natural spring. It's an artisanal spring, and this water is full of iron. That's why the bottom is so orange. This is actually iron deposits. So when you drink it, it actually, I don't know, it kind of makes your mouth taste like your gums are bleeding a little bit. But it's very refreshing. It's very clean water. It's very pure. Just high in iron, that's all. It's super healthy. They come out and check this water all the time. It's really refreshing after a walk. Really cold. Comes from deep under the ground. I don't know, 400 feet under the ground or something like that. But this is all built up a lot more than it used to be. When I was a kid, none of this was built up at all. None of these bricks or these walls were here. There were just a few tread stones in the water, and the casing around the spring was there, but none of the architecture you see there at all. It's actually quite nice now. So the next book on the reread list is Stephen King's Misery. Now this isn't the only Stephen King book from high school that I've reread, but this is the one that I've chosen to talk about. I've seen the movie several times, and I'm reminded of how faithful that adaptation was. Obviously, there's things like the hobbling incident that was tamed down for the movie, and Annie Wilkes doesn't carve his thumb off and force him to eat it. The audiences just aren't ready for scenes like that in their movies, but they are ready for that for books, I guess. I don't know, it's like we can handle things in our imagination more than we can seeing it on TV. It's interesting because the imagination is scarier than, you know, what we see on TVs. So you see something on television or on this big screen in the movies, and it's oftentimes less scary than it is when you read it. For me, it is anyway. The psychological aspect of a thing is often scarier than the visceral depiction of it on the big screen. So taming something down for the movie, I don't know, it doesn't always seem to make a lot of sense to me. But they don't ask me. Anyway, also, Annie Wilkes doesn't run anybody over with a lawnmower either. Oh, someone's coming over to play. I should probably wrap this up. Alright, so there's a playground over there, and some parents dropped their kids off to play on the seesaws and everything, and I didn't want to be sitting over there talking about cutting thumbs off and running people over with lawnmowers. Just this weird guy talking to myself about murder within earshot of a couple of little kids. So anyway, I'm going to wait for the firing range to calm down. I'm going to get my notes out. So Annie Wilkes is probably my favorite villain in all of Stephen King. She's really got it all. She's got an unhinged mind, a history of violence, the proven propensity to commit more, but she's also got this certain level of denial that she's even doing anything wrong. Of course, she does know better, and we're shown these low moments when she goes into her laughing place, which is a place where she goes to be sad and depressed. It actually kind of reminds me of the Joker a little bit. But oh, how I miss the old Stephen King. He really was a master of horror and suspense back in the good old days. Misery is so good, and it holds up so very well. Of all the full-length novels, without a trace of the supernatural, I think Misery is the one that holds up the best. This is purely a psychological horror, and I think it is his best. I will read this book still a third and fourth time for sure. I will see you go through hell again, Paul Sheldon. So until then, just sit tight and keep on writing. Boy, it is getting hot. I don't know what it's up to right now, but it's getting to be a hot day. And I think that's why there's not so many people out here at the park. It is a sunny summer Sunday afternoon, and church is out. And nobody's at the park. Almost nobody's at the park. But it's got to be because it's so hot. It's just nobody's coming out. That's too bad. When I was a kid, this park was always full on days like this. These tables are full of picnickers, and tables are covered in dust and dirt. Never used to happen. These tables were always cleaned off every day. All of them were. It's kind of weird to see. There's cobwebs everywhere. Nothing's been swept out. It's like these places don't get used anymore. It's really weird to see. All right, so anyway, number 9 on the list is Visions of Gerard by Jack Kerouac. Now, I first read Visions of Gerard when I was 16 years old, and Kerouac wrote with this kind of homey, nostalgic aura that I really glommed onto. I'm not sure why, but I remember kind of interpreting the pages with this sort of physical warmth at the time. There were these vivid descriptions of family life, town life, church and school life that just felt quintessentially American in ways that I couldn't really understand coming from this small town, this very limited experience of mine. But Kerouac was writing about Lowell, Massachusetts, which isn't exactly a small town, but it's a small community. His community was a small community. And so there was something about it that I understood, even though he was in a Catholic school, and that's something I didn't understand. I didn't know what catechisms were. You know, stuff I had to learn about all of that. Or catechisms? I still don't know how to say that word right. Anyway, somebody will correct me. But at any rate, Kerouac really let his guard down for this book, and I don't have to be told that. I could feel that on every page. Even on the reread, it was plain that by the end of this novel, even with all this outpouring of Kerouac's honest self, that it was clear that he struggled to express what it felt like to lose a brother. Rather, he was only ever able to express what it was like to admire his brother and to love his brother. And I don't know. And that's an interesting distinction, expressing the differences between loss and love. The loss of a loved one and the love that we felt for that loved one. Those are different things. Anyway, I loved Visions of Gerard. I loved it when I was a teenager, and I love it as an adult. It's the side of Kerouac that I admire the most. I like it more than the beat style stream of consciousness writing that he's actually really more well known for in like On the Road and all that stuff. I really like his personal reflections a lot more than his fast and loose living on the road writing. I'm going to return to it again and again for sure. Whew, just one more. All right, here we go. Oh, that's a big ass snake. Holy shit. Yeah, it's just a big snake. I don't think there's any venomous snakes. It doesn't look like a... Is that a copperhead? It's not a copperhead. Not venomous. That's what I'm deciding. Not venomous. Not gonna think about it. Just gonna film my scene and not think about that big snake. I'm gonna get a shot of this. Oh, there's another one right there. Holy shit. They're everywhere. Okay, so we didn't know if those snakes were venomous, and they were all over the place. There were at least 4 of them. I don't know why there were so many in one place. That was weird. So we moved to another place. It's not that far away, but I don't see any snakes over here, so. Okay, so the 10th book is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I just did a video on Huckleberry Finn a little while ago. It was a very long, in-depth video, one of my longer videos ever, And I think I covered just about everything I could think of to cover in that video. What I want to say is that I got so much more out of it as an adult than I did as a kid. When I say a kid, but I was a junior in high school. But one thing I didn't talk about in my video on my channel was the way that it was taught in my school. And so we were divided into groups, my classmates and I. And we were asked to discuss the book and then to film a modern retelling of Huckleberry Finn, starring all of the kids in our group. And so what is Huckleberry Finn about? It's a 14-year-old white kid who's running away from his abusive father, and it's a runaway slave in slave country trying to fight for his freedom. And the white kid learning compassion for his friend such that he has to fight against the mores of the time and give up his own reputation to fight for what he believes is the right thing, which is Jim's freedom. Why would we be asked to do a modern retelling of something that is so clearly set in a very specific time? This is antebellum South. This couldn't have happened in any other time period in American history. Why would this happen? Why would this be taught this way? I don't know. Why would this be taught in a class of all white students? Why? I don't know, and it was never explained to us. So we butchered it. We butchered the assignment. We didn't make our film about slavery at all. We made it about two friends searching for the lost city of Atlantis. We said, screw it, we're not doing it. Like, we kind of revolted against the assignment on purpose because we didn't want to mishandle the themes of the book. And I think that really speaks to a big problem with the reason that this book gets banned a lot, because by the time you're a junior in high school, you're 17 years old, you're approaching or have reached the age of reason. Your maturity level's a lot higher, or could be anyway, especially in an elective American English Lit 2 class. I feel like with proper instruction in a class like that, you could teach just about any kind of book respectfully and appropriately, but I don't think that was done for us. And so I don't think I got very much out of the book. And I don't think my classmates did either. So it wasn't until reading it now as a 43-year-old adult did I finally get what I was meant to get out of this book. And I put that down to lousy instruction. Anyway, go check out that video that I posted on my channel. That's it. I gotta walk back on this trail now, and it's still really hot. Luckily, the sun's gone behind a cloud and it's cooling off just a little bit. And I've got some cool water from the spring. So, and the trail's only 2 miles, so it's not really that long. But I'm gonna head home. I got a long drive ahead of me. So this was kind of fun for me. I don't know, this seems like it's gonna be kind of a mess to edit, but I had fun making it. Hopefully you enjoy it, and hopefully I can get out of here without getting bit by a snake. So I'll see y'all in the next one.